I hate army painting. For me, painting the same model again and again is like reverse therapy. With every session, it gets worse. Painting a single display model, on the other hand, oh yeah, I really like that. So welcome to I Hate Army Painting, the series where I find the best way to paint my Warhammer. And today we are trying something I've never tried before. Sponging. I specifically reserved this technique for painting vehicles, which unfortunately I still gotta assemble. But where did I put them? What does it mean? Ah, there they are! Anyway, I still had to prime these two vehicles, so I went outside, only to find out it was raining. Oh well. Now, because I'm using sponging, I wanted the foundation to be more durable, so it's a shame I have to use airbrush primer. Usually for gaming pieces, and especially the ones painted with more rough techniques, railguns are better. Obviously it's faster and more durable, on the other hand you risk overspraying. That's why for display models I strictly prefer airbrush primer, as it is very unlikely to clog the details. Speaking of display models, I also started a newsletter a few months back for people who wanna improve. I share extra tips and resources that don't always make it into a video. So if you wanna push your painting to the next level, there will be a link in the description. Anyway, once the vehicles were primed, I realized one important thing. I don't have a sponge. But there is one person who sleeps next to me and happens to pay $25 for a sponge from Sephora. Seriously, what the fuck? With the sponge equipped, I still had to clean it. How fun. To test how useful sponging is, I am using it to paint the armor. So I set up my wet palette, thin down some of that red paint, carefully load the sponge, and we can start. The thing about sponging is that it's supposed to be super easy. Just get some paint on it and start tapping. And you know what? It absolutely works. Great advantage of this is that you can easily avoid hitting some of those cracks and recesses. So in theory, you shouldn't have to shade the model later, right? That's one of the advantages. Another one is that you can use various paint consistencies for different purposes. I actually overthinned my paint here, so this took forever. But for blending and creating some gradients, this would be great. The very first layer took me around 10 minutes to tap on. This is fine, but I already encountered my first problem. The paint got kinda caked into the sponge and it produced texture. You can see that chalkiness and some dry paint particles on the surface. I guess I could counter it by rinsing the sponge more often, but it's not as convenient as rinsing a brush. And to make the matters worse, I discovered another flaw. Sure, sponging is great because it naturally skips the less exposed areas. The problem? It naturally skips the less exposed areas. Using this big ass sponge, I simply couldn't reach these panels. I tried to continue working like this, and to be fair, it doesn't seem too bad, so let's see how it goes. Okay, at this point it's clear that this thing is way too big. So reinforcement has arrived. This should give me much better control and precision. Smaller sponges should make it so I can reach everything, and if not, I can use the edges. Now, indeed, I can cover exactly what I want. Or so I thought. Oops. Well, I guess we are shading these models after all. Yes, it is true that now I was way more precise, but given how irregular are the shapes of this model, it's still pretty damn difficult. I think if I was painting a Space Marine or a Space Marine vehicle, this method would be much more useful. It's still possible to pick out what you want, but this won't be without touch-ups. And at that point the question arises, why don't I just use my airbrush? Well, for you, my dear viewer, that would make more sense. But for this video, I've chosen to suffer through this hell. And suffer I will. Partly because of painting, partly because I stole my fiance's beauty blender and she is definitely plotting payback. Either way, as I continue, I just keep on tapping the surface of the vehicle and try to avoid the most hidden recesses. Again, it should leave the recesses intact, but clearly that's not 100% reliable. Despite that, I gotta say, tapping like a maniac was somewhat satisfying. The process also works exactly like layering or even dry brushing. With every additional layer, you cover less of the surface, trying to highlight the most exposed parts. You know what? At this point, it wasn't looking too bad. But at the same time, we have a long way ahead. Some touch-ups were underway and there were 2 additional layers left. After that, we'll switch to different techniques like edging and all that. With this layer, I cover just the most exposed parts. You can see me start with the cabin, and actually, I kinda make it the focal point of the model. Maybe I'm weird, but I would consider the cabin here like the face of the whole thing. You know, it's just like they consider bumpers, lights and windshields to be face of a car. Anyway, you'll see me work more on the cabin a bit later. Now this layer will make it significantly lighter, almost to a point where I would say it's too much. But a bit later we are gonna use a special trick that'll make everything more seamless. This time we are even more selective. In theory, this would be the moment where I would say it gets faster, but it doesn't. This new layer is very different from the previous one, so I'll have to blend it with some of the previous colors. It's not too bad, although do it enough times and the time sink really stacks up. I should also explain how blending in this way works. Basically, whenever you blend anything, you either do that using translucent paint or by using multiple layers that aren't too different from each other. Obviously, for the best result, you do both. Most likely, you'll see that people put down multiple layers and then blend in between if necessary, which is what I do here as well. Okay, so this is where we are. It looks pretty rough, which isn't surprising. At the same time, I feel like it portrays quite realistic finish. If this was an Imperial Guard or Space Marine vehicle, I would keep it as is. But we are gonna push it a step further. To make it feel more coherent and reduce some of these scratches, we can use airbrush filters. To create a filter, you gotta use pretty translucent paint. Inks or contrast paints are ideal, but also adding some water and airbrush thinner makes it even better. Again, it's absolutely crucial that it stains, but doesn't fully cover, which is kinda the definition of a filter. Of course, if you use like 9,000 passes, it'll cover it, but just a few passes won't. Now, as I'm going over the right side, feel free to compare it to the other side. It makes it more saturated, makes the highlights a bit darker, and gives you more of a uniform result. It's also why I wasn't worried about going a step brighter with my last layer. Of course, it would be possible to skip this step, in which case I would also skip on the last sponged on layer. However, the point of using any technique is not to use only that technique, but to do the heavy lifting. By also adding filters on top, we improve the finish by a metric fuck-ton. Just compare these two and tell me which one would you pick. I've done the same thing for the second Wave Serpent, but now it was time to restore that shading. I really hope to avoid this step, especially when sponging shouldn't touch the recesses, but here we are. You've probably seen me use oil wash already. This is the infamous double-edged sword that makes your minis more defined, at a risk of... well, you probably already know. I am using oil wash for two reasons. First one is that it spreads along the recesses very easily. More importantly though, if you spill it outside the recess, you can wipe it off easily, or reactivate it and clean it. If you fail to reactivate it fast enough though, congratulations! You done fucked up. This time around I have just two models, so it won't be a problem. Oil washes are essentially just oil paints and white spirit or turpentine. I didn't even bother to use varnish beforehand, because I don't mind if there is some extra staining or weathering. Still, I did wipe off what I could, but these two already looked somewhat weathered, so it's not like it looks out of place. Now, I also wanted to have more visual variety, not just red. Just like the box art, my Wave Serpents will have black stripes on them. I don't find much benefit in sponging on the stripes, so airbrushing it is. Initially, I considered using a masking putty for this. Yeah, that wasn't my proudest moment. Masking tape, on the other hand, was much better. You could have noticed at the start that I've primed even the windshields, and this is intentional. If I left it transparent, I would have to paint the inside, which takes more time, and honestly, what I'm about to do looks better to me anyway. A very simple high contrast gradient will do the trick to represent glass. The only downside is that it has that very distinct airbrushed finish. This can be reduced by using multiple layers and colors, but unless you also play around with filters and some brushstrokes, it'll still feel kinda artificial. It's also at this point where I have to remind myself that I am doing f***ing army painting. This is not supposed to be anywhere close to perfect, and little things like that can't really bother me. As I apply matte varnish on top, the airbrushed windshields really make me wonder, why didn't I just use my airbrush for everything? Oh yeah, then what would be the point of the series, right? Now, let's talk about edging. One of the main reasons why we are painting edge highlights is to add more definition. Honestly, definition is one of the most important aspects of mini painting. Whenever someone says that you should increase contrast, you also make the mini more readable. And better readability, by definition, is also definition. To put it into Ooga Booga terms, more edge highlights equal better readability equal more happy hormones when you look at the model. For that reason, I also don't mind making the edge highlights extra thick. These are big ass models, and making the edge highlights thick won't look that absurd. Okay, the plating is pretty much done. If you look at the before and after, you gotta admit, it makes a huge difference. After that, I also painted the black part. Surprisingly, as I was looking at the box art, there aren't any metallics. Perhaps they wanted the Eldar to look more stylish, so everything else is painted just the same way I did on my previous minis. The weapons were base coated with black, and then I added some grey on top. To make the result less bland, I also painted some gems. Sometimes it's a good idea to put more effort into more visible details, even though they are just that, details. This will create impression like the miniature is highly refined, although most of it is rushed. The result is okay. It's nothing exceptional and it is a bit rough, but it would be stupid to expect otherwise given I've used sponging. That's not my biggest problem, however. Because this is such an intricate model with difficult to reach spots, it wasn't easy to get everywhere. Sponging it took way longer than expected, so I am fully confident it would take even less than half the time if I airbrushed everything. As much as I could hate on sponging at this point, I won't. It still might be useful for more simple shaped minis like Space Marines, Necrons, or Imperial Guard vehicles. But in this case, it really didn't shine. In terms of rating, the method is still the GOAT, and sponging won't be anywhere close to that. Although tapping my model like a maniac did some neuron activation in my brain, that's all I can give it. So for me, it gets 4 beards out of 10. With 2 Wave Serpents added, we are close to 45% of a 2000 point army. We still have a lot to do, so perhaps we can enjoy painting some characters soon. Anyway, if you also don't enjoy army painting and you would much rather improve your display painting skills, check out this video next because it'll help you with that. And see you there!